There are just too many words. There are too many words. There's cloud engineering. I've heard SecOps. I've heard platform engineering, waterfall, agile. We're pivoting all over the place. And you know what there is now? Sorry, Jonty, but there is DevOps. That's the latest. That is a new word. Everybody wants to be it. Nobody knows what it is, or at least I don't. We need to try and understand this. This is an idiot's guide to DevOps.
This is Synthesis TV, keeping you on the edge of technology and business.
Jonathan Sidney is a cloud platform lead at Synthesis. He is, would you believe, passionate about DevOps, if that is possible. You are.
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah.
You're actually quite passionate about DevOps.
I am.
And
people.
I was going to say I respect you for it, but I'm not really sure that is absolute.
Wait until I explain it to you, then you can decide.
Yeah, well, let's see if you can explain it to this, the Dummy's Guide to DevOps. First of all, Jonty, who needs to understand what DevOps is? Do I need to understand what DevOps is?
So I think, as with most things in the software engineering, high-tech, IT world, there are levels of understanding.
Okay.
And I think anybody in the industry should have a kind of working understanding of what DevOps is. The technical side of it, the intricacies of how it runs in how things run, maybe not so much, but to be able to understand why it's an important way of looking at things, why it's something that people are focused on. I think from a business point of view, especially, I think it kind of helps frame discussions. It maybe it helps even break down some of the silos, some of the walls between the ever-present business versus tech. I think it does help to bring them closer together.
And that's vital. That's vital, because what we're seeing more and more, certainly what I'm observing more and more, is that tech used to be a place for developers, for the tech people. But actually, it's now no longer, obviously it wasn't ever really purely that, because it was always to some extent about business. It was always about business. But today, if your business units don't understand the value of the technology and how it can transform the business, then it makes life so much more difficult.
Definitely. And I think that's actually a great kind of frame for where DevOps came from. So you say it's a new word. It's maybe not as new as it's been around since about 2009, but it's become front and center over the last couple of years. And I think especially with remote working and COVID in particular, it really did heighten everyone's awareness to what it is, and maybe that statement will make more sense a little later on. But
so far it's gobbledygook.
100%.
Okay.
So if you look at how the world of software engineering and software development panned out, 1950s was the beginning of it, and kind of as it grows up, if you start looking at it in the late 80s, early 90s, you started to see this creation of silos inside tech organizations, inside the technical teams. Never mind, let's ignore business for the meantime.
So even tech was siloing itself.
100%. So if you even just look at the word DevOps, it's a amalgamation of developers and operations. In the early 2000s, or actually mid 2000, early 2010s.
Doesn't matter where.
Early 20. I never know how to those things. The world kind of realized that we're in this weird situation where there were two distinct areas of software engineering. There were the guys writing applications, writing software, and then there were guys running it. And what would happen is you would write code and figuratively throw it over a wall to operations and say, now it's your problem, you run it, you make sure it's secure, you make sure it's highly available, all the good things. And what would happen is then operations would take it and say, well, we can't, there's a bug here and there's a bug there. We can't do this. Throw it back over the wall, and backwards, forwards. Everything just shuts down. Any chance of quick time to value just vanishes, and everything just slows to a crawl. As well as, of course, if you can imagine, lots of finger pointing, lots of blaming.
Of course.
Everybody loved that situation.
Right. It worked for everybody. Right.
In the early 2000s, a couple of people presented a paper. They were from a company called Flickr. they actually coined the term DevOps in this paper, in this presentation, where they explained how they were deploying to production, I think it was about 10 times a day.
Okay.
Which for the time was unheard of.
Fine.
And how they explained it, what they were doing, they were actually actively removing this divide between developers and operation staff and bringing them into a single team where an application would be owned its entire life cycle. Development all the way to running the application in live production environments,
right,
as one team.
Okay.
And they developed a couple of technical practices around it, but by actively breaking that silo down and distilling some ways of work into, of how this seemed to be working for them, they created what is known as, or they coined the term that is known as DevOps.
Okay.
And there were a bunch of people in the audience at this conference. Probably the most important one is a guy by the name of Gene Kim, who co-authored a book called The DevOps Handbook in about...
There's actually a handbook for DevOps.
Yes, it's quite a thick one.
I would imagine, yeah.
But because it's quite technical, but he distills it into 3 kind of core tenets. The most important one being fast flow. And actually the entire focus of DevOps should be...
Speed.
Would
it be speed and agility?
Speed and agility, I think it's very much
using words that...
Very much influenced by the lean startup kind of model where it says, we don't know exactly what we want. We know we have a hypothesis. Let's build something as quickly and as efficiently as possible to test that hypothesis, and then iterate over that until we get to a finished product. Now, if you think about the old way that I was describing, speed doesn't exist there, because any minimum viable product or any prototype is bouncing over this wall countless times before anything gets deployed so that you can test that hypothesis. So you can't be lean and have these old silos. They're incompatible. And of course, now think about what starts arriving in the 2010s. Facebooks, Twitters, Instagrams, all of these massive, not just social media, of course, but there's massive online web-based applications. I mean, Amazon was already a behemoth by then, but Amazon really just explodes. Things like Spotify, iTunes, all of these massive web-based applications. And they all took this to heart. They were digital native. They were cloud native. This was ingrained in their DNA. And the big enterprises started going like, hold on, we want part of this. This looks interesting. And over the last couple of years, and especially the last 5 or 6 years, it's become very apparent that the thought that this was only just for the startups was very wrong. And
right. Okay. So in a nutshell, the one aspect is speed.
Yes.
The next is?
So there's speed. There is consistent feedback.
Okay. And that's almost like real-time feedback. So you've got to keep going back to principles.
Yes. So if you think about if you do a simple Google image search of DevOps and you just look at a couple of the logos. I can honestly say
I've never done that.
You don't have to, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's very boring. I have to present. I have to make up presentation decks. I have to look for them. You'll often see it described or shown as either a circle or an infinity loop. And the reason is
that makes sense.
Part 1, fast flow. Part 2, quick feedback. Continuous feedback.
Okay, give me part 3. This is a cliffhanger.
Part 3 is continuous learning.
Continuous learning.
Continuous learning and continuous experimentation.
Fine.
Now, that can only be achieved if you think about it. If you've got those first 2 pillars, And now try and explain why everybody needs to understand DevOps and not just the technical teams. As I'm sure you can imagine, if you have a business that doesn't understand why it's so important to get that speed and loop working efficiently, then some of the technical work doesn't seem that, especially at the beginning of a project, doesn't seem that important.
So interesting. Because what this does is it goes back to what you were saying before, is it really takes the development team, the tech team, out of their silo. Because if you have constant feedback and you're working back and forth and you're learning from each other all the time, it actually is more. Would it be fair to say that DevOps to some extent is a philosophy and an approach more than it is almost anything else?
Completely. I subscribe to that wholeheartedly. I actually get quite emotional at least saying
No, Shanti, no one can get emotional about DevOps.
No, I get emotional about people saying it's only a technical thing.
Even that, I think, is pushing it a little.
Okay, I'll take that to heart. Maybe I need more friends. No, but the truth is that's how a lot of people, especially tech people, have started to view DevOps. Because, and I myself am guilty of it. Some of the technologies that have become so popular in the DevOps world, if you've heard buzzwords like Kubernetes and CI/CD and continuous testing and chaos engineering, they're really fun to play with. Let's not kid that.
Right, it's not PlayStation, but
fine, okay, but we sometimes and the technical people that I work with, myself as well, we're often guilty of neglecting that. So going back to those basics, those 3 tenets of saying fast flow, continuous feedback, and continuous experimentation is actually really critical. What's very interesting is that one of the presenters from this paper originally in 2009 was interviewed by Gene Kim now this year. Gene Kim's organized publishing house, it wasn't Gene Kim himself. And they asked him, based on everything that's happened in the past 10 to 12 years since you presented this paper, what is your current definition of DevOps? And he said, it's very simple. Any initiative at a company that is aimed at breaking down silos and improving collaboration is part of DevOps. Wow. Has nothing to do with anything technical. And it really has to do with, let's talk value. Let's talk business value. How do we, and business value in its most generic sense, not just making money, whatever the value proposition of an organization or an application is. That is what we need to focus on. And whatever methodologies, whatever technologies, whatever platforms, whatever enables you best, whatever ways of working enables that the best, do that.
Very, very interesting. We don't have a lot of time. So one question that I do need to ask you, though, is you go and talk to a business, you're talking to a company that is looking to do development. Does the drive towards DevOps sit with the tech team, or does it sit with the commercial sector of a business?
I think it's a very nuanced discussion. There are technical components of it that naturally lend themselves to the technical teams and need to be discussed as such. Because if you talk to people who don't necessarily understand the importance of there's 1,000,001 different options out there, you could go down a really large rabbit hole, or deep rabbit hole.
Right.
But at the same time, if you, especially in the big enterprises where they're very potentially old-fashioned waterfall-style processes, if they don't buy in to what the value add of this approach, of this kind of mentality is, you could really, stymie any transformation or any initiative in this area. It really is about buy-in, and I think that idea of breaking down silos is the critical thing. Is maybe at one point in a project it's much more technical focused because you're dealing with implementing certain things, but at other points in the project where maybe you're trying to propose timelines, feature sets, what we're going to aim for, then it's a bit more of a project focus, businessy, commercial focus.
And that is where we leave it, DevOps. At least I get an understanding of it now, and I really do. I really do. It can be a little bit facetious, but it's actually an incredible way. It's an incredible approach. I would imagine that it would save companies time. It would be real-time learning, and the ability to actually finalize a product which is much more relevant and appropriate than if you used a more traditional approach. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it also just enables you to be more open-minded about how you deal with people.
Absolutely. Because it brings the teams together. I was busy wrapping up, but actually
it does help bring teams together.
Yeah,
and it almost in a sense forces people from disparate areas to either maybe even pick up a new skill. Because if I'm working on the same team and I have to understand what is important to another technical area, maybe I should learn how to do that. Maybe not as well, maybe not as in depth, but I understand it. I'm talking to the business guy.
Right.
I can.
John T, I'll have to say that my ability to talk about DevOps ran out about 35 seconds ago.
Fair.
I can do a certain amount of DevOps. You're passionate about, don't get emotional about that. What a fun conversation. Really, really awesome. We were talking to Jonathan Sidney. He is a cloud platform lead at Synthesis, and getting an understanding of what DevOps is. And of course, I make a little bit of fun of it, but it's incredible. It's an amazing, amazing approach to business. If you want to find out more, contact Synthesis. Contact Jonathan Sidney at Synthesis. If you want to find out more, you could also leave a comment and your name below, and we will certainly get hold of you. This has been an episode of Synthesis TV. I'm Howard Feldman. Have a great day.